By the time that I arrived there in in March 1967, it was full-scale warfare at that time, and we went into a series of operations. I was originally assigned to the 1st Marine Division. The 1st Marine Division was located at Da Nang. And we went to Da Nang and checked in with the 3MEF headquarters. It was an instantaneous trip over to 1st Marine Division for most of us, because that was the division that was in that area up in Quang Ngai. And we had an excellent, absolutely breathtaking welcome to the 1st Marine Division. We had to wait 2.5 days in stateside utilities with no change of clothing. We sweated through those things in about the first hour. We didn't have a place to sleep, but we slept outside on the concrete porch for 2 days, waiting to see the commanding general to get the official welcome aboard to the 1st Marine Division. Well, it was amazing, because in that 2.5 days, we were highly expecting a great welcome aboard. General Nixon was the division commander, and he called us into this large conference room, like a theater, and said, "Men, welcome to the 1st Marine Division. We're glad you're here. 1/3 of you will be killed during this tour. 1/3 of you will be relieved for cause because you made small unit errors and sent home. 1/3 of you will have a good, successful tour. I hope you're in that third. Welcome aboard." And we were kind of in shock. So we left there and went over to the airfield and got taken down to Chulai. Chulai was the home of the 5th Marine Regiment, and I went out by truck to that regiment later that day, and finally got out to this place. We were on the plane and then the truck immediately, and we were out there and went to be assigned, and I was assigned to the 5th Marines. The 5th Marines assigned me to the 1st Battalion, and the 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, and we waited for a couple hours till I got assigned, and I had to go to the restroom, and been all day, and I was really hurting. So I asked somebody where the head was. They said, "It's a 2-holer up there on top of the hill." It was an outhouse up there with 2 little places like the old outdoor restrooms we had. My grandfather had one just like that. And so I'm 3rd in line. And when I'm in line, I'm waiting to get in, kind of doing a little dance. And then the next 2 guys went in, and I'm waiting. About that time, the Air Force aircraft came over and was dropping DDT for mosquitoes all over this hill that this company was at. And I was assigned to India Company, and they had their own little hill. So I'm waiting to go to the restroom, and now it's my turn. And just about that time, they started dropping flares. These great big parachute flares that last about 5 minutes. They really light up the battlefield like you wouldn't believe. You can probably see close to 750 to 1,000 yards. They're really big. It's quite bright, like sunshine. And when they drop these things out of airplanes, it activates a parachute, it pulls the parachute out, and the parachute then has this brass cylinder on it that slides off, and when it slides off, it's like lighting a match. So it illuminates the flare, and the flare goes for 5 to 10 minutes. One of those brass cylinders came off and went through the tin roof of the outhouse that I'm waiting to go into. And it hits a man on the leg and breaks his left leg. So we got involved in that and got him out of the outhouse, and then had to clean him up a little bit. Had somebody go get a corpsman. The corpsman finally comes up. They get a stretcher and take this guy away. And by this time it's midnight, and I go back to the company area to get assigned. And the XO, this former Mustang, was there, and he said, "Lieutenant, hope you have a better tour than the last guy we had. He was going home today after his 3rd Purple Heart, but he went up to the head a while ago, and this brass cylinder came through and broke his leg, And now he's being medevaced to the hospital ship, and he'll be out there for several months before he goes home. So this adventure continued, and we're all laughing about it, but it's kind of serious. And I got assigned to India Company and became the 3rd platoon commander and replaced this guy. I never knew his name. I don't remember his name. I just heard it one time and he's gone. But anyway, that's the way my tour started. And we were in garrison there around this hill for about a week and a half, and then we kicked off on an operation, and it's kind of like a training mission because we had very little contact. And we went patrolling and looking for the enemy and didn't find very much. One of the things we did find, though, was this crossing. The company was out in the field, everybody was out, and I was given the mission to set up an ambush on this main trail where the VC and other people were infiltrating at night. And I studied very hard at basic school and came in very high in the class and everything, and won a couple of awards there. And I was well prepared as anybody has ever been going to Vietnam, I thought. And I knew exactly what to do, so we set up an L-shaped ambush. That means a machine gun firing down the axis, the main trail, and one assault team, killer teams on one side, and each of my teams had 3 men in them. They were fire teams, not full strength, 4, but 3 in each team. And they were out there for a while, and finally I had a call of the radio about 12:30. We have people coming into our ambush site. Okay. Waited. About 5 minutes. So I called this ambush leader and said, "What's happening out there?" He said, "Well, they came into the middle of our ambush site." I said, "Well, why didn't you activate the ambush?" He said, "Oh, you want me to start?" So they fired the machine guns, fired from the side, and there's complete silence. And we wait and wait. The company commander's over with me now, listening to the radio. I said, what happened out there? He said, "We activated the ambush." So what did you get? "Oh, you want me to go check?" So they sent a recon team out to check and see what was out there. And he finally came back, and about the time he came back on the radio, there was 1 round fired. I said, "Oh no." They turned over one of the bodies and it wasn't dead, and this guy shot somebody. I was really concerned about that. And I said, "What happened? What happened?" He said, "Well, there were 8 men in the ambush. All of them were killed. But they had 2 water buffaloes in it, and one of them was injured, and he was making all these sounds and bellowing and whatever. So we shot the water buffalo and got him out of his misery." We found out that it was an NVA paymaster that was actually there paying their men in the field. And so we captured whole bags full of North Vietnamese money. It looks like monopoly money, except it's years old and it's so frayed and discolored. So we gave every man in that ambush team what equivalent to 1,600,000 Vietnamese dong, whatever that is. And we gave everybody else in the platoon about 1,000 or so, and passed that out for souvenirs. And they killed the buffaloes, and we left those. So I guess the villagers probably ate them or whatever. But it was a very funny thing. So as we're going in off this operation, and I don't remember what the name of the operation was, just a short little thing. It's kind of like an admin training thing. We had another incident. This man, one of my squad leaders, was a corporal. And this corporal fell into this hole. And he started screaming, and they went over and found out that he was in this hole, which was about 8 feet deep. And we didn't know that then that those were entry holes into the tunnel complex. It was all underground. We found out that he had stumbled into this thing, but there was on purpose, they had put a python in there. And this was a small one. It's about 5 or 6, 7 feet. but it had bitten this guy in the shoulder, and it was he was screaming, bloody murder. So we got a squad out there and put a grappling hook. Each one of my squads 13 men, had a grappling hook and about 20 feet of rope. And we hooked it into the man and the snake and pulled them out, cut off the snake's head, and his name was Sergeant Young, or Corporal Young. And it is, he was absolutely bad luck Charlie, because later on in this thing during Union 1, we had a night movement to contact, and he was part of the flank security that operates about 450 meters out to the flank. In jungle terrain, he's in 30, 40 yards out there, not very far. But they provide security for us in front of us and on both flanks. And we, the main unit, has rear security on the rear all the time. He fell into another hole, same man, but this one is a larger hole. It's about 10 to 11 feet deep, and there's a snake in it too. But this is much larger, and it has a hold of him on his neck and his left shoulder, and teeth marks and things. So we had 1, 2, 3 grappling hooks. We had to use 30 men to pull him and this heavy snake out of this hole, and then we couldn't get the snake to stop squeezing him, so we had to cut the snake laterally, cut the muscle structure, because there are band muscles in the snake, and we pulled him off. And the corpsman said, you know, we got to medevac him. No, he's not hurt, Doc. He's just got some teeth marks. Put some phthalate on it. Put some thing on it. Well, the next morning, the corpsman came to see me again and said, sir, we need to medevac him. I'm not medevacing him, Doc. And he said, sir, would you just speak to him for a minute? Okay, send him over. This is going to be real quick. Took off his helmet. It's a black guy. And he did have teeth marks on the shoulder and the back. But his hair had turned completely gray overnight. So we medevaced him. Never saw him again. And funny things like that happen, and it's releasing tension and whatever, but it was funny. So those things happened before we really got into contact on Union 1. Several days after this, Corporal Heister was 6'3", and I went into a tunnel. We found another tunnel in this village, just right outside the edge of this village we were going through. And he found the tunnel. He came to me and said, I've looked in it. We've went down as far as we could see. We didn't have a flashlight, but it appears that they're North Vietnamese in that tunnel. We heard talking. And so we got in there with a flashlight. He and I went back in with his flashlight and got down about 100 yards into the tunnel and found out that, yes, there were North Vietnamese there. And we fired our rifles at them. We had these new M16s that everybody had problems with because the rounds expanded in the chamber and wouldn't extract, and you had to take your cleaning rod and knock each round out like they did in the Revolutionary War. And one shot and that's out. So we went out of the tunnel, came back in with flashlights and pistols, and went down and had a firefight with 6 NVA that we saw in the tunnel. We hit several of them. We went back out, reloaded, got more ammo, went back in the tunnel with flashlights and CS grenades this time, and actually a high explosive grenade, fragmentation grenade, and threw it. And then we got out of the tunnel and took off our gas mask, because you can't run and you can't exercise with a gas mask, or it fogs up on the inside, particularly in that humidity. So we got a new breath, went back in, had a real firefight with them, and this time, and it was firing both ways. We threw a couple more frag grenades and a couple of CS grenades and left the tunnel. And by this time it was about midnight, and we put guards on the edge of the tunnel and looked around in daylight the next morning, found where we thought that tunnel came out on the other side of the village. And we started digging into that area. We dug into the back part of the tunnel, and we found out that that there was a headquarters back there. We had killed 8 bodies, were in the tunnel, and they had maps and documents and all sorts of things. So it was some kind of headquarters, we don't know what. But we had to keep moving, so we evacuated that stuff and continued to move. So we actually went in the tunnel 4 times that night, and fortunately neither he nor I were hit. But he was so big that his head kept rubbing on the top of the tunnel because they were made small so that Americans couldn't get in it. There's a trick that they taught us about taking 2 wire coat hangers, bending them into a 90-degree angle, and like divining rods where you find water, you walk across something, when you get over a tunnel, those rods move out and show you the direction of the tunnel underground. And it actually does work. It works really well. And we did use that later on, but we had no idea what that tactic was and did not understand it. And it caused us tremendous problems in Vietnam because they could hide up to 10,000 people in those mountains that had been hollowed out. And we couldn't find them. We went around them on both sides. Usually they were in a heavily wooded, heavily vegetated area. And so you couldn't find the entrance to them. And they were camouflaged extremely well. Once again, if you've seen that movie, We're Soldiers Once, the very back of the movie, the very last scene in the movie, is about this Vietnamese commander that goes into that tunnel complex and then has to evacuate. One Hal Moore. After this first little operation we were on, we went into Quay Son City, which was the headquarters of the 1st Battalion, 5th Marines. Now, Marine Battalion is fairly large. They're 1,500, about 1,500. And our battalion was on Hill 63, about 15 miles closer to Da Nang. And we were activated one night to go immediately to Quay Son City. So we moved all night long at about 5 o'clock in the morning, or 5 or 6 in the morning. We arrived at Quay Son, the headquarters of 1st Battalion, 5th Marines. And I was in, of course, the 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, and I was in India Company, I Company. Okay, we went from down to Quay Son, which was their base, and we had a few enemy that opposed us on the roadway, but those were fleeing things and they ran and escaped, but they reported reinforcements are coming in, and this is where they're coming from. So when we got to Quay Son, we immediately were given an order to move out about 10,000 meters to the west, go around a mountain, go up into a valley between 2 mountains, and go another 7,000 meters up there, and then attacked the next night. And we got there and started preparing for a night attack and went up in a position. 2 companies made the attack, and we attacked into this mountain peak and knocked the enemy off of that area and had very few casualties. And since we had slept in about 2 days, we actually harbored in place and got a little sleep and did whatever, and took care of those things. And then we continued into Operation Union 1. And the next day, we left that area. Delta 15 from the 1st Battalion sent out a patrol on the south side of this route that was going from west to east. And in this village, they attacked the company in front of us. And it was a Delta Company. And Delta Company sent out a patrol the next morning to reestablish contact with them. In fact, we had moved two platoons of our company over to make an envelopment on that village, but we never got the orders to proceed. We had flare ships up there at night and watched what was going on for parts of the night, but we were without sleep all night. And the next morning, the Delta Company patrol had not come back in. So I was the southmost unit, the closest unit, and I was ordered to go out and find this Delta Company patrol. And I moved for about an hour and a half to maybe 2 hours, and I found the patrol. The patrol had been ambushed by the North Vietnamese, and there were 11 people killed, and they buried the bodies under a short. This was very humane, I thought, from the battlefield. And they had wounded 2 people with stomach wounds, and one had a sucking chest wound. And they patched them up, gave them water, took their weapons and their equipment, and left them there. And that was my first time with seeing what the enemy at that time was very hospitable to casualties and things, an enemy that they captured. They did not take prisoners, they left them there. So I called back to company headquarters, battalion headquarters, and they sent out the rest of Delta Company, came to that position and took care of those men and the casualties. And at that time, I was told to go further south and set up a defensive perimeter out there and allow this evacuation and casualty things to take place. And I did. And we were on this little knoll about 200 feet up in the air. It's called Hill 200, maybe 200 meters, 200 meters. And it had a great view of everything that's south. There was a little valley in front of us that went out for about 800 yards. And then the little river went across us, and then nothing but jungle on the other side. So I set up a position there across this wide top of the hill, narrow and wide, and I had not enough men to go across the entire thing, so they sent my company from my battalion out, and they made contact with me and came up, and we were having some sniper fire that time from the North Vietnamese who were in this covered area across the creek from us. And my company came in, and the company commander for my company was Judge McElroy, Marine captain. He was called Judge because his dad was a federal judge. And he chewed tobacco, Red Man tobacco. He always had, his map case was full of Red Man tobacco. And that becomes funny later on in the story. But anyway, he came in, and I said, "Hey, Captain Mack, there's a sniper that can see this area. You need to stay down behind a rock and get a secure place for your company headquarters up here." He said, "Kenny, don't worry about me. I can take care of myself." And about that time, he got shot through the shoulder, right under the shoulder blade, and it went in this side and came out the back side. And he's all right. He's still standing up. He said, "Here." Reached in his back pocket, got a red handkerchief, and said, "Put that through there and tie a knot on each side." "I can't get anything in there. I couldn't even get a wire through there, Captain." He said, "Give it to me." He stuck it in there with his finger, and had his gunnery sergeant stick something with the other side, and he cut it off, couldn't get it through there, of course. And we put some tape on it, and so he was down behind this big rock, and that became his company CP. And he had a gunnery sergeant named Denota that was a very capable, extremely capable staff NCO that kind of ran the company, I think, for a while there. But that was our disposition. And meanwhile, we had more and more sniper fire from our front down there, and it's getting late. It's getting out of sunlight, so we're preparing to defend that area that night, but our whole right flank is open over here with nothing. And so somebody ordered Bravo Company 1-5 to come over and reinforce our little defense on top of that hill. And my company, India Company, is about 1,200 meters behind me, apparently in a defensive position. So they come in, I take the company commander, we walk around that area, we coordinate between where my unit is and his unit, we coordinate the fire plan, we do this, and we're all set. And that, by this time, and they're in position, it's maybe 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. So about 11:45, I go back and check again to see if everything's okay, and I find out that this Bravo Company 1-5, who came over to reinforce us on this flank, had moved out and didn't tell us. So we're completely open on that side. And about that time, the first attack took place. And the NVA attacked our position. And we had handheld flares that went out, and we illuminated the battlefield, and we could see 400 or 500 of them directly in front of us. I had about 67 people, and my company had maybe 150, 170, and they're on that side. Well, the area facing the river and the creek there was right in front of me and a little bit over on this side. And we fired everything we had at them, and they fell back. But at 2 o'clock, the same thing happened again. And I had moved one of my machine guns out to this side just to fire out that side to make sure nobody came around and enveloped us from our open flank. And the firing continued for quite a while, but we beat back that attack and we had no casualties. Well, then the mortar started coming in, and we had a mortar that came in before their next attack. And I think it was probably 60 millimeter mortars or maybe 82 millimeters. But one of the shrapnel pieces went through the front tooth of my very best squad leader, Sergeant by this time, we promoted him, Corporal Henrik Boots from Holland, who 1 week before I had stopped the company moving at 7 o'clock in the morning and given him his citizenship papers because he had joined the Marine Corps to get advanced citizenship, and he had just got it in the mail, and I presented it to him that morning, and he had it in his pack. But that piece of fragment went through his front teeth and into his throat, and he couldn't breathe, so I did a thyroid tracheotomy on him, opened up his throat, put a ballpoint pen thing in there to allow air to get in, and he was breathing, but he wasn't conscious. And unfortunately, about 3 hours later, he passed away. And Lois and I went to his funeral in the States when he had a memorial service, and it was a tearful thing because he was beloved in our unit, and he's the only man that I lost in Vietnam, other than a Navy corpsman who also was killed in the next battle, and he disobeyed orders and went out to a casualty to help the casualty. And we ordered him never to do that. Stay in a covered position. We will bring the casualty to you. You're more valuable than anybody else, and we have only two of you. And sometimes we were down to one, but the Navy corpsmen were beloved in our unit. And I don't know if Navy corpsmen are more like doctors than corpsmen. They can do anything and everything, and they're wonderful. And they're just worth their weight in gold, we thought. So he was one of two that I had killed during the entire tour. Very sad. Very, very sad, particularly that outstanding quality that he had. We couldn't get him out, though, because we were under constant attack for the next 5 hours. Every hour on the hour, the North Vietnamese marshaled hundreds of people and came up the hill. And we, after the second one, we were out of ammo. The company, 1,200 meters behind us, resupplied us with some ammo. And we had some, and the third assault at 0300 in the morning, we used that ammo except for about 20 rounds. And they gave us some more, and we get some more a little bit. And at 4 o'clock, the attacks broke. They only had half as many at 4 o'clock in the morning, and there was no 5 o'clock attack. So they had used their manpower. Later that morning, we were sent out to do a recon in front of us to try to regain the enemy and where they went and what they did with their casualties. And we could see drag marks on the ground, and we saw a couple of bodies, North Vietnamese bodies there, that had a rope around the left wrist with a round loop in it. And what the North Vietnamese would do, apparently, was grab that loop and just drag the body out of the battlefield because they're small, and even added weight was too much. But that's what they did to get their casualties. And you can see drag marks all over the place and blood trails and all these things. But they did get most of the casualties out of there, I guess. But we found hundreds down there the next day. And that was my first experience in actual large unit combat. And it was an eye-opener. We learned you can't have too much ammo. Less food, more ammo. Funny things you learn, funny lessons you learn, but that was stuck with us. We did find a dead body there. We searched the bodies, and found that one of them had a North Vietnamese flag folded up on his chest. And he had a packet of documents and a letter in there. And the company, not my platoon, but the company had a interpreter with us, and he interpreted. Apparently in Hanoi the year before, he had the outstanding rifle squad in the 2nd NVA Division. And he was killed that night in that one of the attacks on the hill that night. And we sent his flag and all that information back to division. Some of the people want to keep the flag, but thought it was important to get it back there. Maybe it'll get back to a parent someday, I don't know. We had about 250 total bodies that were picked up directly in front of my unit, about another 100 over in this section, and maybe 80 or so over in this thing. And since it was my company's area, I didn't go over into their area to see what was there. But that's a residue of 4 attacks that came that night in sequence. And boy, did they have the people. Unbelievable. After this operation was over, we huddle lifted back to our new home was Hill 63, which is about 20,000 meters closer to the coast than 15 is at the city of Quai Son. And all these things, all these activities in Union, Union 1, Union 2, the subsequent operation that took place after that, were all in this Quai Son Valley area, and they're all within about 30,000 meters apart. And from our new location, we had to move about 25,000 meters to get down to Quai Son. It was about a good night's movement to get there by foot. But they took us back to this new area, Hill 63, which is directly just south of Tam Key in Vietnam. And when we got there, the regimental commander had two Jeeps full of ice cold beer, and also had cooks, regimental cooks out there, and the regimental cooks had scrambled eggs and bacon, and it was just a great thing. It was great. It lasted a day, and then you're back at it. And then we had about a week and a half of little activity, patrolling and those things, but weapons practice, those things, and before he had to go to Union 2. And Union 2 started with this movement that took place down to Quai Son City about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. We got there maybe at midnight, continued to move over about 10,000 meters to the west and then up into a valley. And then we moved back and continued to attack to the south in Quai Son Valley. On 2 June 1967, I was a second lieutenant in the 3rd Platoon of India Company in the 5th Marine Regiment. I'd been in RVN about 3 months at that time. The day started as my platoon was leading the company in a search and destroy operation against the 31st NVA Regiment. Near Quai Son Valley, about 45 miles from the Marine headquarters in Da Nang. At 1000, we had contacted advanced elements of the North Vietnamese Army, killing 8, capturing 2, as well as capturing 2 60mm mortars. And at approximately 10:15, my right flank security notified me they had observed a North Vietnamese force setting up an ambush on a trail ahead of us on the far side of the bank of a river. I stopped the movement at that time and went over to my flank security, which was in a secure positions. They couldn't be seen there in foliage. And we could see across this rice paddy. It was about 400 yards across. And the North Vietnamese were setting an ambush, and we observed them with binoculars. And they had about 60 people. And they had 2 machine guns in that area. We didn't see mortars, but we looked at them, and I decided that I was going to do a flanking movement and do an envelopment of their position. I told the company commander what I was going to do. I left 1 squad, 13 men, and a machine gun, which I had 2 attached to me, in the base of fire, and we set up across the front in foliage. And I sent 2 squads with another machine gun around the flank and I had a 60 millimeter mortar with me also. So had it registered in on their position. Now the riverbank on the other side of this little stream river was only about this deep, but it was fairly wide. And then there was an 8-foot bank on the other side, so we would have had to go through the water and try to get up the bank, which I'm not sure we could have at that position. So we sent them around through the forest, through the foliage, around behind them. And when they were in position, they called on the radio and said, we're in position, and we launched the attack with a red flare. And at that time, our machine gun and our squad over here was hitting their position, and they were firing back at us. But the two squads went around behind them and came in and attacked from the flank and the rear, and actually mopped up that area with no casualties. And we had about 40 killed and maybe 20 prisoners. We didn't know what to do with prisoners because we never had one prisoner before. So we took off our bootlace out of our left boot, cut it in 2 parts, used that for bootlaces, took the other one out, tied their hands behind their back with the bootlace, and kept them. And then we had to get them out of there and get their weapons out of there, get the the bodies stacked up, and then go through them for documents and things. And while we were doing that, the company commander ordered one of the fellow platoon commanders, the 2nd platoon, to continue the attack around their position and down this trail through the mountains. And the trail was actually pretty good size, about maybe 8, 6, 7 feet across. Pretty good size for carts and things like that. So he continued the attack, and he immediately ran into resistance on their left, our right over there, and he couldn't make headway. He was in the open area down there, and he got shot through the neck and died. His name was Rawson. His dad was a 4-star admiral in the Navy. He commanded the entire Pacific Fleet. So he was sink-pack fleet, and he was killed. Well, the company commander was anxious to continue the attack. I think maybe a little too anxious. But he put the other platoon, the 1st platoon, out to go around on this flank. And that platoon, the 2nd platoon, that was the 2nd platoon. So it went around on our left flank, and guess what? They got hit over on that side too from entrenched enemy that was on their left flank. And it stopped the attack. The platoon commander was hit twice in the right lung, twice in the left lung, once in the left hip. And I patched him up and put duct tape on the sucking chest wounds, took him over, threw him in a helicopter, got him out of there, and he got out okay. Well, the company commander wanted to keep the momentum going. We had no momentum, but keep the momentum going. So he takes the command group, which is radio operators and the forward air controller and the artillery FO and the corpsman and the radio people and those things, and he takes them over to join the attack on the left side. He gets shot also in the left leg. He got shot in the right above the left knee, and it hit an artery. So I went over, and Captain McElroy is his name, and he anyway, that was Captain Stackpole was his name. McElroy is the other company commander. So Captain Stackpole was down, and I went over and patched him up, put a compress on that bleeding artery, threw him on a helicopter. We had the old M34 helicopters, H-34s, and those looked like an old grasshopper, with rotors up on one rotor on the top. It took off, and when a helicopter takes off, it gains altitude, and then it dips the nose and gains forward speed, momentum. And it had just got to that thing. It was about 10 yards above the ground. It started to move forward. And it got hit in the right front with a recoilless rifle round, exploded, knocked the helicopter out of the air. And the company commander's thrown out on the rice paddy there. Went over and got him, got another helicopter in, put him on the helicopter, and the helicopter's gone, and he's out of there. So we've had 2 platoon commanders evacuated and the company commander, and I got a call from the company gunny that I'm now the company commander. I'd been in Vietnam for about 3 months, and all of a sudden I'm in charge of the company. So we got the battlefield policed up. We continued the movement that day, and we made 2 attacks in the afternoon, little resistance on either one, and we stopped around 4 o'clock in the afternoon and were waiting orders from battalion. Well, the battalion headquarters had been mortared by the enemy with 82 mortars from one of their regimental headquarters, and the battalion commander lost an eye, and the 3 had been hit with shrapnel in his back, and he's evacuated. The 2 was killed. The 1 was gone. The XO is in the rear, and all of a sudden the battalion commander is a first lieutenant. And he called me up and said, we're under real pressure. We've got to keep the pressure on the enemy, or we're going to be overrun. So he ordered us to do a night attack that night to relieve the pressure. Well, we got to the PLD, probable line of deployment, about 2:30 in the morning. And we're waiting to be tied in over here on the right with Captain Mack's unit before we assaulted. And I had the assault signal with me, a red flare, and his rightmost unit ran into the NVA defense. So the NVA fires first. They're not surprised by our night attack. They fire first. And they had so many things firing, we couldn't move. We were behind rice paddy dikes about this big. And it was difficult to move. So I got the FO over, forward observer, to call in artillery. We can't get artillery because one of the companies from 1st Battalion, 5th Marines, was in a hand-to-hand combat, and they were decimated that night. The company commander got a Medal of Honor, Captain Graham. Eventually we found that out, but they were in a bad sandwich, and they had everything they could do. They had the priority on air support and artillery. So we're laying behind this paddy dike out there for about an hour and a half, and we can't get anything. We can't move because the AO said, I don't know what you're up against down there, but I counted 45 machine guns firing across your front, and they fire 3,000 meters out to your left flank. So they go a lot further out on both sides than you do. You're just this little unit in the center, and we're laying there waiting for air support, waiting for something to happen, and it doesn't for about almost 2 hours. So finally they said, the artillery guy called me, and my forward observer, the FO guy that handles artillery, was a basic school classmate of mine named Stan Holmes. Stan Holmes is probably the closest resemblance to Charles Atlas I've ever seen. He had a 32-inch waist and a 48-inch chest. Great football player at the Naval Academy, All-American football player there. And he was extremely impressive. And he said, we can't get anything. And we're on standby. So finally, about 4 o'clock in the morning, they called over and said, okay, I've got 152 rounds of 155 ammo left. Now that's big explosive stuff. And you shouldn't be close to it when it goes off. They cover about 150 meters. That's about how far we were behind our objective. So for the next 45 minutes, he moves the artillery there, where they're hitting, across the entire frontage there and back again, then back again. And the artillery guy called about 4:45 and said, we have 3 more rounds of ammo. They're smoke rounds. We're out of ammo. We can't fire after that. Okay. When the 3 smoke rounds came in, red flare goes up, we assault into the enemy. The enemy has departed the battlefield. We found 800 bodies there about in this thing that we were in, and we were taken out of there pretty soon after, so we really couldn't do a good. But each one of those 155 rounds has a crater that's 8 feet across and about 5 feet deep, and it totally destroys everything. There are body parts, carnage, it was just a mess out there. And we did a small mopping up thing, but the battalion was in dire straits because we had two companies involved in that night attack. Both of us had not slept, and we were just exhausted. So they called that operation. They terminated operation at that event. But we were successful in the attack, although it wasn't our attack that surprised them and caught them with their pants down. It was actually very fortunate. We had a few artillery rounds left, and then we had air support after daylight, so it was over. But the Marines performed admirably. They were great. For my first day as company commander, it was really good. And that afternoon, when the company commander got shot through the leg and medevaced, I got called by the gunny to take over the company. I was behind a paddy dyke. My nose is sticking up. The helmet's here. I had two radios, one in each battalion here to my company over here on the company net. And I just received instructions on what to do. And the same sniper that shot the company commander and the other platoon commander, it was an NVA sniper, we found out. He had fired at me as the new company commander and put a round or two through my helmet. And I felt this, like this, on the head. And I turned to my radar and said, "It's a good thing I had the helmet on. I got a big dent up here." He said, "Lieutenant, that isn't a dent." I took off the helmet and looked at it, and it was a whole... God's been very good to me.